I know you. You're that.
Hello, this is the Radical Reviewer, and I just reached 10,000 subscribers! Yay! So, you folks probably all know me from my various book reviews, but now I'm happy to announce that I can finally drop this books and theory BS I've been milking to appease the algorithm, and I can finally make videos about something I actually want to talk about. Video games! Yes, today I'm taking a look at Metal Gear Solid: The Phantom Pain by Konami and Kojima, and came out in 2015 and whatnot. Oh, also, this video will contain light spoilers for the Metal Gear games, like basically all of them, and light spoilers for a few other games like Red Dead and Days Gone. Basically a fair amount of spoilers. I'm not used to talking about things which I can't make any spoilers, so let's just dive into it. As a series, Metal Gear Solid was introduced to me in this way.
The nuclear weapons disposal facility on Shadow Moses Island.
Yes, if you ordered a Pizza Hut stuffed crust pizza, you got a PS1 demo disc, which was a pretty sweet deal for my tight budget fam, getting sustenance and entertainment, a 2-for-1, for my scrappy siblings and I. Now, if you look at my little game selection, you can see I have a lot of open world or semi-open world titles. And with the PS1 Metal Gear Solid demo, there was something about this wide range of weapons in a complex open environment with complex behaving enemies to outwit that just spoke to me. And once I had the whole game, I played it through, and then I played it through again, and then again and again and again and again and again. And with a complex, interesting story, Metal Gear Solid was one of the first things that radicalized me growing up. Concepts like heroes not living up to their own legends, terrorists with complex and compelling demands, strong and mysterious female warriors, a scientist striving for opportunities for invention being tied to a system that uses those inventions to kill.
I used to think that I could use science to help mankind, but the one that wound up getting used was me. Using science to help mankind, it's just in the movies.
A PTSD-stricken master soldier struggling to cope with being cranked through a system that mechanizes combat, the role of genes in self-determination, and the monologues. Oh, the monologues.
6 bullets, more than enough to kill anything that moves.
I am back from a world where such words are meaningless.
I am the most powerful practitioner of psychokinesis and telepathy in the world.
A lady sniper, huh?
Didn't you know that 2/3 of the world's greatest assassins are women?
You said that love could bloom on a battlefield, but I couldn't save her.
It is called the ear pull. It is an event where 2 opponents pull each other's ears.
Why do you continue to follow your orders while your superiors betray you? Why did you come here? Well, I'll tell you then. You enjoy all the killing.
I only felt truly alive when I was staring death in the face. I don't know. Maybe it's written into my genes.
From here, I went to play the second game, whose concepts of the information age and controlling public perception and even memory and history through manipulating internet communication, not only did that blow my mind in a recently post-9/11 society, but also, if you like that kind of thing, you might be into this as well. Anyway, like most people, the third game was my absolute favorite. Interesting and compelling story with double and triple crosses and concepts like history and time shaping the motivation of various so-called allies and so-called enemies. I could go into great detail about all 3 Metal Gear Solid games and how each one came out at very formative times in my life and shaped my perception of the world, the complexity of their stories and such. but I more or less agree with Super Bunny Hop's various videos, so I recommend you go there for that. I kind of fell off the bandwagon after the third game. I couldn't afford a PS3 or a Vita, so I didn't end up playing Metal Gear Solid 4 or Peace Walker until just a few years ago. All that said, for the most part, I think Metal Gear Solid 3 and Peace Walker serve as the best analogs for addressing Metal Gear Solid 5. From what I know about Portable Ops, it also works as a jumping off point, but I never played Portable Ops, so for the sake of this video, it doesn't exist. Anyway, now for the main event. Let's talk about Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. First, I don't blame Kojima for the poor quality of the story. I realized that he was basically done with the series and had tried to end it multiple times before, and he was being screwed over by Konami, and those circumstances don't exactly make for a great product. Also, there's plenty of conspiracy theories, like how key people who worked on all the other main titles weren't part of Metal Gear Solid 5, and that's why it's bad. But let's put all that stuff aside. Here's what I want to do. I want to break this into two parts. Nitpicky gameplay complaints. Wow, I'm trying to say that 5 times fast. And in-depth story complaints. Let's start with the nitpicks. I've been holding on to these complaints for years. I just need to get this stuff off my chest, and no one will listen to me about it, and you're here, so hear me out. First, patrols. This open world has nothing going on. I'm not the first commentator to make this point, but god, a few truck transports and that's it? Isn't this supposed to be a war zone? There should be convoys, many different types of convoys. How much more interesting would it be if, in the open world at any given point during a side mission or free roaming, a battalion of soldiers would spot you while marching between outposts? Perhaps a convoy of a few jeeps and a tank. Hell, there's such a variety of vehicles in this game with multiple tanks and walker gears and jeeps and trucks, but you never see them in action, except as set dressing or as part of a main mission. To have these randomized groups of vehicles and groups of personnel traveling between bases would be much more realistic. It would make the world feel more lived in and add some stakes and intrigue to the giant gaps between outposts. Let's say you're in one of those outposts or bases and bam, an armored convoy of vehicles or walker gears is passing through. Did you see them in time to hide? Are you going to try and pick them off one by one or just hide until they pass? Did they spot you and now you're totally screwed? That'd be so interesting. To see a game that did this better, look at Days Gone. Now there's problems with Days Gone to be sure, but look, as you're riding around, random shit happens. You'll see a bear fighting zombies, or you'll be having a firefight with a camp and the firefight will attract a zombie horde and you can watch the people you're fighting struggle with the horde coming in. It's just fun to watch these game systems reacting to each other. Second, more guard interactions. In Metal Gear Solid 5, the guards seem to just walk around or sleep, and that's it. Remember in Metal Gear Solid 3 where you can see the guards doing push-ups and running laps in the Groznygrad base? Why aren't there teams of guards just out in the world running exercises or anything? Like, sure, sometimes there's guards practicing shooting at the shooting range at the Afghanistan Central Base Camp, but there should be more than just that. Third, disguises. Metal Gear Solid 2, 3, and 4 all had disguises. These both switched up the gameplay and allowed for interesting exploration of the game's mechanics. Being disguised as a soldier in Metal Gear Solid 2, being disguised as a scientist or a mechanic, or especially as the base commander in Metal Gear Solid 3, and blending in with soldiers and rebels during the fights in Metal Gear Solid 4. How cool would it be to have some disguise mechanics in this open world setting? Fourth, cool and wacky weapons and items. Like, the Metal Gear Solid 5 weapons are super samey, and when I look over the series, there are super cool and wacky weapons and items. Like, ever since the end of Metal Gear Solid 2, I've always wanted to be able to use the sword in the main game. And like, sure, there's Metal Gear Rising, but still. Also, I'd love to have the magnetic bullet reflector thing that Fortune and Ocelot use in Metal Gear Solid 2. That would be awesome. Metal Gear Solid 4 had all kinds of weird stuff, like the sunlight gun, and that old-timey rifle that caused windstorms, and the railgun, and the corpse mask. And Metal Gear Solid 3 had the ricocheting revolver bullets, and the monkey mask, the knockout cigarettes, and all those special camouflages. And Peace Walker was full of wacky stuff. The stealth mat, the various radar systems, the goofy cardboard box tank thing. Really, I imagine from the way the R&D screen is laid out in Metal Gear Solid 5 that they were planning on introducing new weapons and items down the line, but I don't think we're ever going to get that now. Fifth, a reason to use a variety of weapons. As soon as you get the silenced tranquilizer sniper rifle, you hardly ever use another gun. Maybe the stuff to make tranq rounds could be rarer? I mean, you're supposed to be a rough and tumble military group strapped for cash. Something to encourage you to use all these weapons you've made. Like, Peace Walker had bosses where you'd fight a bunch of guys and a tank, and you had to defeat the guys and the tank before you could Fulton the tank back to your base. This encouraged the use of a variety of guns. Speaking of which, sixth, a reason to kill guys. Let's look at this in two ways. A, I kind of feel like Hitler playing the game where I would tranquilize everyone with an A+ or an S rank and kill everyone who wasn't good enough. And this makes Big Boss act like a bad guy. And this idea could have been exploited, commented on to improve the story. But also B, why are you able to Fulton all the people? Aren't they supposed to be like your enemies? In Peace Walker, most of the guys you encountered weren't worth Fultoning, and so you would take them out in other ways. And for the people you did Fulton, you had to personally sort through them and apply them to various stations at the base, and even fire soldiers if you were above capacity. This was tedious, and so I can see why they got rid of it. However, it limited how many people I would Fulton back to base because I didn't want to go through clicking and sorting every single person after every mission. Maybe a system could exist where you interrogate soldiers to find out if they'd be willing to join your base? Or bring back having the sorting soldiers stuff from Peace Walker. I don't know, some way of making it so that you couldn't just snipe, trank, and Fulton everyone. Because basically, I never used any of the other guns I made. Seventh, and this one seems pretty obvious, but rather than replaying old story missions as perfect stealth or subsistence, you could just toggle on and off perfect stealth and subsistence options for every mission. Hell, on that note, I'd like to be able to enter free roam on subsistence. Enter the open world with no equipment. Why is that not a thing? Eighth, some interior locations. Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2 took place primarily indoors, and 3 had a couple of huge indoor sections. So some indoor sections would be nice. That said, let's play at that Camp Omega from Ground Zeroes. Let us access the camp with the loadout that we've built up from Phantom Pain. Ninth, I want to be able to take the helicopter to different landing zones while in the open world, as opposed to always going all the way back to the helicopter menu thing. You can take the helicopter from platform to platform while on Mother Base by pressing square or something as you get on. Why not different places on the map? This would be fun and make using the gun on the helicopter something that you would actually do. 10th, fix the enemy targeting system. The targeting system is far too overpowered. It basically breaks the game. The box of enemies with their cone vision from Metal Gear Solid was overpowered too, but it was balanced out by the limits of the controls and the camera angles of the game. I liked the Metal Gear Solid 3 various radar systems. The spinning radar that would have dots show up quickly but then disappear. The activated radar system, which had the ability to show everyone on the radar's current position, yet it made a beeping noise that would attract guards who were very close to you. And both of these radar systems didn't distinguish between soldiers and the wide variety of animals on the ground and in the trees, which made it very challenging. It made it fun. The third type of radar from Metal Gear Solid 3 was the sound radar, which would beep faster and faster and faster as enemies approached, and that was very intense. I liked that a lot. However, what I think would fit best with Metal Gear Solid 5's tight controls and Big Boss's persona as this badass soldier is the threat ring from Metal Gear Solid 4, which was cool because it played to the idea of Snake being this intuitive soldier, able to expertly sense what was taking place around him, and yet it didn't just hand enemy locations right to you. Now, let's compare those various radar systems to the enemy targeting in Metal Gear Solid 5. Quiet can just quickly mark everyone in the area. D-Dog marks anyone close enough to matter, and you basically know exactly where everyone is at all times. Now, yes, you can turn off the markers, and I've come to do that when I play, but the marking system in the game can be greatly improved. Maybe Quiet can only mark enemies that she currently has in the sight of her scope, and that's it. That'd be cool. Or maybe D-Dog could get a general sense of where soldiers are, but only faintly, and only in a small radius, and for a limited amount of time. In fact, no matter who it is, if it was Quiet or D-Dog or even yourself, marked guards should fade to unmarked over time. It's just ridiculous that you can mark a guard and know exactly where they are for like the rest of the game. These changes, plus adding the Metal Gear Solid 4 threat ring, would greatly improve the stealth in the game. 11th, having a regular soldier as your buddy. Now this fix can go from small to wishful thinking. The small change would be that you could just pick any member of your staff to be your buddy, and give them some kind of simple control scheme like D-Dog, where you can command them to stay or follow and attack on command. Onto the wishful thinking side, maybe this regular soldier buddy could be controlled by, I don't know, a second player? Like, on the couch next to you, or even online? That would be awesome. 12th, a reason to stay in the field as long as possible and ensure thrift. Okay, so every now and then when developing a lot of things, Mother Base would go into the red. But the cost of this was very minimal. I mean, what, some guys fight on Mother Base when you go there, which you never do anyway? The ease at which I could get from the base back to the field, and always going back and forth, I spent like half my time in the damn helicopter, which was super boring. I thought I was the owner of this small, struggling mercenary army. I should be trying to make every bullet count, worrying about my suppressor, making snap judgments on if I should use a gun once my suppressor is worn out. I should be raiding supply rooms and soldiers for every scrap of weapons and supplies that I can find. I should feel like the resources I secure in the field are making a direct impact to my small stores of goods back at Mother Base. Red Dead 2 had a very similar problem, where it felt like contributing to the camp had no impact to the story or gameplay.
You can be the biggest degenerate piece of shit with the lowest honor and be a complete C-word to everyone in the camp. That's cunt. C-word is cunt. And never donate a dickel to the services or the camp or the food or anything. And the story just keeps on chugging like nothing ever happened. Like, what the fuck?
Maybe if the helicopter was more expensive or just not always available, I'd be encouraged to rely on what I could get out in the field, and more encouraged to stay in the field and not do the constant back and forth and back and forth. Hey, maybe like I said in number 1 and 2, I'd be more interested to stay in the open world if it wasn't so empty. 13th, things to do on Mother Base. Now, there are a few shooting things that you can do that are basically identical on each platform and are only worth doing once, if at all. Peace Walker had a variety of interesting training options. You could shoot balloons, you could train with your fellow soldiers in the field, and there is many things that could have been done differently for Metal Gear Solid 5. Basically you could just copy the training from Peace Walker. It was okay and would be much better than the stupid shooting gallery thing that we got. But B, maybe each platform should be unique. Maybe the combat platform can have VR-style training simulators like Peace Walker or Metal Gear Solid 1 and 4, so that you could test your weapons and the game mechanics, and also improve your soldier's rank. Maybe the medical platform could have a hospital in it, where, like, if you never sent soldiers out on combat operations, then the medical center would be empty, but if you did send soldiers out, depending on the difficulty of the mission, then the medical center could be full of injured soldiers, and you could see the true cost of the combat operations. Maybe the main platform could have like a mess hall where you could watch soldiers eat and talk and play ping pong or whatever. Maybe the R&D platform could have some dumb mini game like the classes in the Rockstar game Bully, and you could use that mini game to improve your R&D. Maybe the animal conservation platform could be attached to the main base, and like there could be a side mission where you track down and tranquilize escaped animals. Ape Escape style. Really, any of these changes would be an improvement because Mother Base is boring as hell. 14th, just give us the damn Hal Emmerich tank thingy, that battle gear. You planned on giving it to us in the game anyway, just give it to us. You could even lock it behind a 100% completion wall, but still, just give us the damn battle gear. 15th, child soldiers. Child soldiers should be peppered throughout certain areas of the open world, and make it hard to tell which ones are child soldiers and which ones are adult soldiers when they fight you. Like, if you shoot a child soldier, it's an instant fail, and they should totally keep that, that's fine. But they talked about the child soldiers being this big deal, and they aren't. Making them actually peppered throughout the game world where your various firefights take place, meaning that you could shoot a soldier you didn't know was a child soldier and get an instant fail, that would make their impact real. And finally, 16th, Metal Gear Solid 4 style, war zones and prisoner escapes. Like with the disguises, I hate when a game adds something cool and then removes it in a future iteration. Like, why did Saints Row 3 get rid of being able to use random stuff as melee weapons, like in Saints Row 2? What the hell was that all about? That was really cool. And same goes for Metal Gear Solid 4 and Metal Gear Solid 5. Metal Gear Solid 4 had a few segments in the game where you were in an active war zone, and this was a new thing compared to the other games, and it was really awesome. You could ignore both fighting sides and use their fighting as a distraction and cover for you to sneak, or you could disguise yourself as a member of one of the sides and use that for cover. It was an interesting mechanic. And at one point in Metal Gear Solid 4, they do this very ingenious thing where there are imprisoned soldiers, and you can choose to leave them imprisoned and advance to the next areas only facing the guards at their regular posts, or you could free the prisoners and let their fighting distract the guards, allowing you to sneak through the combat, or you could disguise yourself as one of the prisoners and fight alongside them. And this final option, on top of being very fun, also allowed you to access a new item if you were able to help the prisoners reach the final area and escape. Now, these two mechanics, the active war zones and fighting along prisoners, might seem very hard to implement in this open world. But let me first say, isn't the Afghanistan open world section supposed to be a war zone? But we see zero fighting. Zero fighting. But besides that, in my opinion, the implementation of these ideas could be pretty simple. For the Warzone part, just have an area off the map where soldiers are constantly climbing in from, much like the war zones in Metal Gear Solid 4. Just a slow and constant stream of soldiers. And now, maybe if you wiped out the outpost, the flow of soldiers would stop, and the remaining soldiers would cheer and then jump back off of the map. And for the prisoner escapes, all it would take is 1 or 2 outposts per map to have an area where some soldiers were imprisoned that you can help escape and fight alongside them, and again they would make their way to the edge of the map and cross out of bounds. How much more lived in and higher stakes would the world feel if they had these mechanics? Okay, so I just named a bunch of nitpicks, but there is stuff that this game does really well. For example, this game has the tightest controls of any Metal Gear Solid game. The sneaking and everything just feels really right to play. The ability to pick up enemy weapons and weapons from storage rooms is really cool as well. And the buddy system is really neat. There are certainly things that this game does right. Okay, now that we got the nitpicking structural stuff out of the way, let's dive into the story. First, let's take a look at the characters. Why is Revolver Ocelot so damn boring? Like, he's a super goofy, charismatic character in Metal Gear Solid 3, and really seems like he could become the person from the other Metal Gear Solid games. If the big political difference is between Zero and Big Boss's interpretation on the boss's wishes, and if Ocelot is the boss's son, and he's always this double, triple agent in all the other games, shouldn't it be Kaz that's acting like the boring one and Ocelot that's acting like the crazy one? Just flip those two characters and that would improve the story a lot. I mean, Big Boss and Ocelot are supposed to be basically brothers, right? And in the game, they're both so boring. Regarding the character Quiet, there was this fan theory that Quiet was Chico from Peace Walker after transitioning to female, which timeline-wise would make sense. I think that would have been a really cool character development, much better than the character that we got. And what about the bosses? And I don't mean the boss or boss. I don't mean these characters. I mean the boss battles, the phantoms or skulls or parasites or ghouls or whatever the hell they're called. The bosses in Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 3 were so interesting. Now, I thought Metal Gear Solid 4 was a little bit of a step back in complexity with these super samey bosses, but the voiceless bullet sponges from Metal Gear Solid 5 are even worse. The skulls and the man on fire, they're a far cry from the bombastic monologue delivering bosses of my childhood. That said, let's take a look at the story overall. Metal Gear Solid 5 is supposed to come after Peace Walker, or Portable Ops, or whatever. I think Metal Gear Solid 5 would have benefited from a much more linear and impactful story like the one in Peace Walker, where events flowed one from the other, each mission seeming to have significance to the overall story. First you make contact with a village, then you free a captured villager, and you make your way down the river to a truck depot, and all along the way you're following the story. This seems to be very much missing from Metal Gear Solid 5, where it's kinda unclear what any of these various clients even want. The client wants you to destroy the comms equipment. The client wants you to take out this guy. The client wants you to take out this tank. The client wants you to save this prisoner. It's like the main missions are just as boring and disconnected from the story as the side missions are. To see how an open world should handle this, maybe Red Dead Redemption 2 is better, where the missions are based around where your camp is currently located, which changes over the course of the story. It makes for a more coherent story in an open world environment. Although, to be honest, I feel like Red Dead should have kept you locked out of certain towns as you were ran out of them until the end of the game, like how they did for Blackwater, but that's another story. Or look at Days Gone, where sections of the map are locked off or opened up as you progress, and the various camps with their various goals and motivations allow for a more coherent story in an open world. Also, if you're supposed to be like a doppelganger or whatever of Big Boss, why the hell was that not really taken advantage of? With the way the missions are played out in Metal Gear Solid 5, where you select them from a list, they could have had each Big Boss do different or even contradictory things across the different missions. That would play with our understanding of what was going on in the story. Like, maybe as you're playing through the story, you think, this is kind of bad storytelling and there's weird plot structure, or maybe it's poor characterization going on here, and you get confused by the inconsistency, and then bam, you discover the twist. You've been playing as two different people. One is who you wish Big Boss was, and the other is the Big Boss who becomes the true villain. This would make the twist in the story much more impactful and interesting. Okay, so you folks are probably aware that all the Metal Gear Solid games follow a core theme of some kind. Genes control you, memes control you, scenes control you, fan service controls you, needing constant stimulus because you're bored on the bus controls you, not creating this whole themes idea because you didn't expect your series to last for 30 years controls you. And for Metal Gear Solid 5, the main theme is language. And language could be a very fascinating theme. For example, look at Sapir-Whorf's theory of language relativity. Language relativity is a principle claiming that the structure of a language affects its speaker's worldview or cognition, and thus a person's perceptions are relative to their spoken language. For example, a man tells a woman, "I want to fuck you," or the woman tells the man, "I want you to fuck me." In both cases, the man is the subject of the sentence, and the woman is the object. I wonder what that does to our subconscious perception of women. Or similarly, perhaps in a Spanish class you learned that the Spanish word for dog is perro. But actually, Hispanic dialect typically diminuizes words, so perro becomes Peruito. My Hispanic uncle explained to me that the Cuban dialect is even more diminutive, so I guess perhaps Peruito becomes Perotichico? Or something like that? Or how about how in Spanish you can drop subjects like I or you or we or us, and instead just change the structure of other words in the sentence to imply the subject. For example, you don't have to say, yo soy a comunista, you can just say, soy a comunista. Sapir-Whorf postulated that these language differences affect our perception of the world. And there is certainly a lot to talk about with how we are controlled by language. But the game has no language puzzles, no bully-style developing your language to get out of trouble or using that language skill in the field. Not that Metal Gear Solid games are known for their dialogue options. And there's no narrative around why everyone on your base magically speaks English. You just Fulton them from Afghanistan or Angola or whatever, and then they magically speak English all of a sudden. So how does Metal Gear Solid 5 tackle the theme of language? Well, you're in an open world and don't speak the language, you better Fulton a guy who does. Done? Okay, cool. Oops, now you're in a new open world with a new language. Fulton one more guy. Okay, cool. Problem solved. Like, really? The parasites and cultural language colonialism isn't really touched on in a meaningful way. I mean, Black Mask over here says a little bit about how his language was taken away from him and his big evil plot is to wipe out the English language and wipe out their cultural colonialism. But this theme was incredibly underutilized. Just a few cutscenes, that's a far cry away from the previous themes which were woven throughout their entire stories. Another big theme in the game is the theme of revenge. Let's take a look at the two locations the game takes place in, Afghanistan and Angola. Well, the US was funding the Mujahideen terrorist group in Afghanistan, destabilizing its secular government. The US claimed it was funding the Mujahideen to thwart the Soviet invasion, but the US actually began funding the Mujahideen 6 months prior to the Soviet invasion. In total, the US gave $3 billion in weapon and aid to the Mujahideen terrorists, leading to widespread death and torture. One method of torture that they used was to remove strips of flesh until the victim died. The US totally abandoned Afghanistan after the Soviet invasion in a move that the Afghan people call the Great Betrayal. It's not surprising that this all ended up coming around to bite the US in the ass when the Mujahideen devolved into the Taliban. Angola is a similar story, where the US was funding the UNITA terrorist group with mercenaries, CIA agents, anti-aircraft weaponry, and of course, millions of dollars. UNITA used this support to go around murdering and torturing and raping people and recruiting child soldiers. This all leading to over 300,000 deaths and the highest amputee rate in the world. These are two stories of the US going in and funding murderous, torturous terrorist groups, and then abandoning the countries after the fact. These are great examples for the theme of revenge, and for English colonialism, but they're not really touched on either. I'd be really surprised if anyone who beat this game had any understanding of this history of US involvement in Afghanistan or Angola. Now, Super Bunny Hop already touched on this next point, but basically, Metal Gear Solid 5 is redundant because the story was already covered in Peace Walker, and also this other game that doesn't exist called Portable Ops. The argument essentially goes like this. Big Boss is the big bad guy in the original Metal Gear games. He uses child soldiers. He has nuclear weapon launching robots. He's a terrorist. The works. The big boss from Metal Gear Solid 3 is this fun-loving, charismatic, idealistic, naive soldier guy. And so how did we get from one to the other? I mean, we were kind of already on the way to that version of Big Boss by the way Metal Gear Solid 3 ended. If you recall this story, we think that our mentor, the boss, has totally betrayed us for no reason. And by the end, we discover she's, this wonderful hero, mentor, savior of World War II, the world's greatest soldier, full of complexity, but it turns out she saved the world again, but was totally screwed over by the US, and we were the guy tricked into pulling the trigger. And so in the conclusion, Big Boss doesn't shake hands with the head of the CIA, and he seems to be on the path to turning against the US government and becoming the big boss of the Metal Gear games. This is where Peace Walker comes in. Yes, Peace Walker, and the beauty of the leftist strong man. Whether it's the anarchists in Rojava, the CNTs, Spanish anarchists, the Viet Cong, the Black Panthers, the Brown Berets, the American Indian Movement, or Black Bloc, or perhaps more relevant to the story of Peace Walker, the Sandinistas and the Zapatistas and the various other guerrilla fighters and people's armies of Latin and South America. There's just something romantic about an underdog story, about fighting for justice against all odds. The slave revolts in Haiti, which led to the overthrow of the slaveocracy. The Sandinistas brutally fighting against the US-backed Contras. The Viet Cong fighting heroically, digging miles of tunnels and carrying deconstructed armaments piece by piece to engage in the massive Battle of Dien Bien Phu. The radical Union members in the US who faced train cars full of inmates who were brought in as scabs, only for the Union to take the train car in armed struggle and set the inmates free. The American Indian Movement's occupation of Wounded Knee and Alcatraz.
Like I remember Dien Bien Phu, like I remember the Tet Offensive, like I remember the Battle of Little Bighorn and the Wars of Pontiac, like I remember Nat Turner's Midnight Ride, like I remember Cubans and Angolans shot the forces of apartheid from African skies at the Battle of Cuito, Cuernaval.
And of course, Che Guevara, who Big Boss is characterized after in Peace Walker. Yes, everyone loves the story of an underdog fighting for what's right. And this is the perfect transition position to get us from the Metal Gear Solid 3 Big Boss to the Metal Gear Big Boss. And Peace Walker does a really good job of telling this story. In Peace Walker, Big Boss has built up the beginnings of a scrappy little mercenary army, which is A, attempting to be used for good, and B, wanting to give the soldiers and warriors of the world a purpose. Perhaps there's something here that books like Tribe and War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning touches on. I mean, in a way, Big Boss wants to create a people's army. And over the course of the game, you really get into that narrative. You liberate villagers, including children, and you give them a chance to get revenge and to fight for their freedom alongside you.
I wish I was dead.
Okay then, I'll put you out of your misery.
What?
Any last words? Shoot. You are only going to kill a man. I just wasted a bullet. Don't waste your life. Listen to me, Chico. You died here today. You understand? You're hombre nuevo. A new man. Now, give that new life to me.
Huh?
Fight with me, little soldier. Show me how strong you really are. Dry your tears, then promise me one thing. No smoking until you get older. Remember, real heroes are never as polished as the legends that surround them.
You got it, boss.
You're so caught up in being this cool mentor, liberator, hero that you don't even notice that, whoops, you just made child soldiers. The cheesy role of nuclear deterrence and the fear of imperialism and your desire to protect your troops, your people's army, that motivates you to have nukes to protect yourself. And now, whoops, you're a nuclear armed terrorist. You're so caught up in this underdog hero liberator story of helping small bands of rebels fight for their freedom, you don't even realize that you've totally become the private mercenary army having child soldier using robot nuclear wielding baddie from the Metal Gear games. The story comes full circle. And this is altogether a better story, and perhaps, if anything, Metal Gear Solid 5 needed to be a Peace Walker remake. I mean, that's not that strange of an idea. Metal Gear Solid 2 is an intentional copy of Metal Gear Solid, and Metal Gear Solid is basically a remake of the old Metal Gear games. The series has a history of retelling itself. So why not? Big Boss going from a charismatic hero to a bad guy, the doppelganger thing, separating the hero that is you from the villain that is Big Boss, and the theme that's touched on throughout the game about how heroes never live up to their legends.
You guys were real heroes.
There are no heroes in war.
Legends are usually bad news. There's not a lot of difference between heroes and madmen.
Real heroes are never as polished as the legends that surround them. I'm no hero. Never was. Never will be.
And if this is all intertwined with a narrative about a complex underdog hero, like how Big Boss is portrayed in Peace Walker, this all could have left us with a truly fascinating story. Now, of course, this would have meant remaking the entire game, something totally different than what we got, but I love the way that Peace Walker used this strongman underdog story and gets you caught up in the heroism and then totally slides in the nuclear weapons and child soldier stuff right under your nose, and you just kind of go along with it absentmindedly. And Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain really missed this narrative. Anyway, that's my rant about a series that I really love. I hope that you liked it. And as always, I'd like to thank my wonderful patrons: Alyssa Turner-Gibb, Bobby Lean, Kamazat's Altar, Cider Shot, Donnie Tiny Hands, Edward Cruz, Emmanuel Visconcelos Torres, Evan Matthews, Ishwanda, Jack, Jan Waterman, Jiggly Puffer, Jilly Bean, Callie, Linux Powered Communism, LS, Lucy, Lukalele, Mad Blender, Mara Penguin, My Fake Name, Nick, Oded Sayer, Oletino Debui, Only Dog Knows, Petey Morin, Paint Eater, Pat Ron, Sean Butterfield, Susie O, Tammy Aaron, The Fool, The Surfs, Torquepine, Tony Harrison, Uncultivated Identity, Vera, and Worst Maxi. And if you would like to support me on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/radicalreviewer. And if you're interested in radical theory, looking for a book... Okay, the outro really doesn't work for this video. But if you do like the book reviews, don't worry, there's definitely more coming. I've got a script of For New Liberty, which is like the anarcho-capitalist bread book that I'm working on. I got a script for that argument book that Ben Burgess came out with. I've got a script for 17 Contradictions in the End of Capitalism that I'm working on. Lots of cool stuff, so, you know, I don't know, look forward to that. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Snake, what's wrong? I thought you were good with dogs.